In my family, there is a moment every woman over 70 is handed a piece of paper and told to sign. I have watched it happen to my mother-in-law, Celestine, in a kitchen that smelled of rendered duck fat and old newspaper. I watched her pick up the pen. I watched the slight tremor in her wrist. I watched how quickly they moved the paper away before she could read the whole thing. She signed. She was 68 years old, and she signed. And she spent the last 5 years of her life telling herself it had been the right thing to do, the gracious thing, the thing that kept the peace. She was dead at 73, and to this day not one of her children can tell you what she signed, only that it was just a formality. That is what they say when they believe you have stopped being curious. Just a formality, just a signature, just a little piece of paper that in no way, shape, or form is going to change anything for you, Mama. We just need it for the accountant. I was at the table that night. I was 36 years old. I was married to Celestine's son, Renard, and I had been married to him for 11 years. And I understood at 36 that the kitchen we were sitting in was a room that had made its decision about women already and was not consulting us. I could not have told you that evening exactly what I was going to do about it someday. I only knew I was going to remember it, so I did. I remembered it for 38 years. This is the night I refused. I want you to see me first, though, as I am right now. Not as I was at the long white oak table that spring evening in 2022 in the private dining room of Maison Mercier, the restaurant my late husband Renard and I built together on the corner of Claiborne and Desire in New Orleans, Louisiana, the autumn of 1981. See me as I am this morning. It is early. The light through the kitchen window of my house on Frenchman Street comes in sideways, the way it does in June, pale gold and already warm. The coffee pot finished its cycle 10 minutes ago, and I have not poured myself a cup yet because I am sitting at this table holding a document. 14 pages. The first page is soft at the corners because I have held it many times. The last page is still crisp because I have barely touched it. That last page is where the renewal box sits, waiting. 30 days from today, I must make a decision. I have known about this decision for the better part of 3 years. I have told no one. I want to say that again, because I know some of you will hear it and think I am describing a woman who was afraid. I was not afraid. I told no one, because telling no one was the correct tactical position, and I have always been a tactical woman, even when, especially when, the people around me have preferred to think I was not. There is a version of quiet that comes from defeat. There is another version that comes from knowing exactly what you have and choosing the right moment to use it. Those two versions can look identical from the outside for quite a long time. That is the point. Let me tell you how it began, or rather, let me tell you how it ended the first time, because that is what I mean when I say the night they held the meeting. In my family's version of events, what happened that evening in the spring of 2022 was a board meeting, a professional restructuring of organizational roles, a difficult but necessary step in the maturation of a family business that had, they would be quick to acknowledge, been carrying certain legacy structures that no longer reflected its operational reality. They have told this version to each other so many times that they believe it now. I was there. What it was an ambush, a polite ambush, a well-dressed ambush, an ambush with a PowerPoint presentation and the attorney present. But an ambush nonetheless, prepared in advance by people who loved me and had decided, in that love, that I was something to be managed. Renard died the 14th of February, 2019. He thought it was funny, dying on Valentine's Day, and I am inclined to think he would have wanted that noted. He was 69 years old, strong as a longshoreman all his life, taken by a blood clot that formed in his left leg sometime in the night and reached his lung before dawn. He had gone to bed perfectly fine. He ate his dinner, watched the news, kissed me on the cheek, said he was tired. He did not wake up. There is no dramatic story to tell about the dying itself. The drama was everything after. What happens in the aftermath of a man like Renard is a kind of rearranging, not of furniture, though sometimes also of furniture. What rearranges is the understanding of what things were. A man's death is a story, and stories get edited in the retelling, and what tends to get edited first is the parts that make the survivors feel complicated, the contributions that cannot be straightforwardly credited. the decisions made by the person beside him that look, in retrospect, like his decisions. Because it is simpler that way. Because the alternative is to acknowledge what the woman beside him actually did, and that acknowledgement costs something. It requires a redistribution of the story's weight, and in every family I have ever known, that redistribution is the one negotiation nobody wants to have. Renard and I opened Maison Mercier together. That is not a courtesy title. I mean together the way a building is built together. He framed the walls, and I ran the electrical. He was the kitchen. I was everything else. Every vendor contract, every lease renewal, every conversation with Gerald Plufthursty, the city inspector who had a weakness for our Creole bread pudding and a fondness for envelope transactions on the back dock, which I shut down in the spring of 1987 by spending 2 months learning the fire code well enough to recite it back to him, clause by clause, after which he became notably less interested in envelopes and notably more interested in inspections that passed on the first visit. Every spreadsheet, every insurance claim filed after Katrina, and there were 14 of them, and I want you to hold the weight of that number for a moment. 14 separate claims, while we were also trying to figure out if our neighborhood was coming back. Every renegotiation with suppliers who took the Katrina chaos as an opportunity. Every conversation with the bank. Renard was the genius, and I was the infrastructure. And I say that with full knowledge that infrastructure is the less glamorous half of the equation, and zero shame about it, because I have watched enough beautiful restaurants collapse to know that genius without infrastructure is just a very expensive fire. But here's what families do. Here's the pattern that I have named, and that you have recognized, and that most of you have lived some version of, which is why you are here watching this, and why the comments section of every video, like this one, fills up with women saying, "Me too, that happened to me. I know exactly what you mean. When a man dies, his wife becomes an adjective. She is Renard's widow. She is the late owner's mother. She is the original cook's partner. Bless her heart. She does not disappear from the frame exactly. That would be too obvious, too easily objected to. She is repositioned, moved slightly to the left, titled carefully, with a word that honors the past and implies the future is already handled. It is done without announcement, and almost always without malice, which is precisely what makes it so difficult to counter. You cannot argue with an assumption that has never been stated aloud. You cannot object to a conclusion no one has admitted reaching. The repositioning happens in the grammar, in the way the subject of every sentence slowly becomes someone else, and you find yourself in the role of context rather than agent, and if you say anything about it, you are accused of being difficult, of not wanting what is best for the family, of holding on too tight. Malice you can argue with. Habit is almost impossible to fight, because no one believes they're doing it. Our son Marcus took over day-to-day operations after Renard died. This was planned. Renard and I had always intended for Marcus to run the kitchen eventually, and the transition had been gradual enough that by the time Renard was gone, Marcus was already, in most practical respects, in charge of the cooking side. Marcus was good. He had his father's palate, and his father's arrogance, and his father's way of standing in the center of a room as if the room had been built specifically to contain him. The way certain men stand who have never once walked into a space and wondered whether they belonged there. I loved Marcus. I love Marcus still. But what Marcus had that Renard never had was a son of his own, Theodore Mercier, 29 years old at the time of the meeting, fresh from a hospitality management program at Tulane, where he had specialized, apparently, in what the program called strategic brand evolution. Carrying a laptop bag that cost more than our first walk-in refrigeration unit, absolutely certain that what Maison Mercier needed was a clear-eyed assessment of its organizational structure and a willingness to make difficult decisions. Theo. He wore slim-cut linen shirts in every shade of pale, ivory, sage, the particular gray-blue of a sky just before rain. He kept his hair cropped very close on the sides, and his sneakers were always spotless, in a way that suggested he did not spend time in kitchens. He had his grandfather's cheekbones and his grandmother's stubbornness, and I say that second part without any pleasure, because my stubbornness was developed as a survival mechanism, not as a design feature, and watching it in a 29-year-old face that had not yet needed to survive much, was, in the plainest terms, a complicated experience. He had started attending vendor meetings the year after Renard died. I did not object. He had started CCing himself on email correspondence between me and our accountant, a man named George Turode, who had done our books for 22 years, and who I noticed around this same time stopped calling me directly and started sending his questions through Theo. I noticed this, and I did not object, and I did not say anything about it, because I was learning something. I'm always learning something. Theo had started referring to himself in those emails as the operations lead, which I also did not object to aloud, because there is a particular kind of information that only reveals itself when you let something run and watch where it goes. And what I was watching was choreography, the small, almost imperceptible steps by which a young man who loves his grandmother, who genuinely loves her, who believes in some fundamental part of himself that he is doing right by her, edges her toward the door. He does not know he is doing it. That is the worst part. He does not know because nobody has named it to him, because the women who could have named it have mostly signed their formalities and gone quiet. What I had not told Theo, or Marcus's wife, Danielle, who organized the meeting and will be important shortly, was that I had known since 2003 exactly what card I was holding. I had known for 19 years, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me stay in the room with you for a little while first. The meeting was called for a Tuesday evening in April, 7 o'clock, the private dining room at Maison Mercier, which we have always used for two things and two things only: the annual staff Christmas dinner and conversations we did not want overheard. The main dining tables were deep mahogany, brought in piece by piece from a restaurant that closed in Mandeville in 1994, and Renard and I had spent 3 weekends refinishing them ourselves, which I mention not for sentiment, but because that is the kind of detail that tells you who built a place. The private dining room had its own table, different wood, different history. White oak. Renard's father Elias built it in the spring of 2004, the year Elias turned 70 and decided to take up woodworking because his doctor had told him to find something to do with his hands that wasn't a kitchen, and Elias had interpreted this as broadly as possible. The table was too wide for the private dining room by 4 inches on each side. You had to turn slightly sideways to get to the chairs at the far ends. Nobody had suggested replacing it in 18 years because nobody wanted to be the person who displaced Elias, even the memory of Elias. And in that sense, the table was exactly the right size for the room it was in. I arrived at 6:53. I've always been early. Punctuality is the one form of respect that costs nothing, which is why I notice when people do not offer it. The restaurant was closed to diners on Tuesday evenings. We opened Wednesday through Sunday, and the front door was locked, so I came in through the back, through the kitchen, which was dark except for the emergency lighting above the exit doors. A kitchen at rest smells different from a kitchen at work. It is the same notes, but quieter. The grease and spice, and the sharp edge of cleaning solution settling into each other. The particular stillness of a room that is simply waiting to be needed again. I have known that smell for 41 years. I know it the way I know my own heartbeat. I ran my hand along the stainless prep counter as I passed. The metal was cold and smooth and solid in the way good equipment is solid, not checking for anything. Just making contact, I went into the private dining room and took my usual chair. Left side of the table, 3 seats from the far end, directly beneath the wall sconce whose light is strong enough to read by. Old habit from 20 years of reviewing documents in that room. I set my bag on the table. Inside it, a yellow legal pad, 3 pens. I do not attend meetings where I am not the one taking notes. And at the very bottom, under the legal pad, a document I had retrieved from the fireproof safe bolted to the closet floor of my bedroom at home that afternoon, after dinner. 14 pages with a blue cover sheet and a notarial seal. The notarial seal was beginning to show its age at the corners, where the paper had gone soft and the gold embossing had lost some of its brightness. The text on those 14 pages, however, had not aged at all. Text like that does not age, it just waits. I left the document in the bag. There was no reason to take it out yet. Danielle came in first, which surprised me. Danielle Mercier, born Danielle Fontenot in Thibodeau, had been married to my son Marcus for 31 years, and had spent most of those 31 years orbiting the restaurant at a careful distance. She had her own work. She had run a tutoring center for many years, quietly successful, and she was the kind of woman who organized her life around parallel tracks that rarely intersected. She came to the restaurant for special occasions, for family dinners, for the occasional big event. She was not a restaurant woman, and she knew it, and we had always coexisted comfortably in that knowledge, but she was organized, methodical. When she set her mind to something, she was thorough in the way that people who are self-taught at systems tend to be thorough, with an attention to logistics that made her formidable in any context that required coordination. She had organized this meeting. I had known it was her from the first email, 3 weeks before, which had gone out under Marcus's name, but had Danielle's planning in every detail. The schedule, the room, the specific note at the bottom. Please respond by Friday so we can confirm attendance. She pulled out the chair directly across from me at the white oak table and sat down. Her nails were done in a deep cranberry that she refreshed every 10 days, without variation. Her reading glasses were on the chain of small gold circles that she had worn for the last 6 or 7 years. She looked at me in the way she sometimes looked at me, with the expression of a woman who has already made a decision and is now simply observing how the circumstances arrange themselves around it. Opal, she said. Danielle, I said. We sat with that for about 90 seconds. In a quiet room, 90 seconds of intentional silence has a texture to it. You can feel the other person deciding things. Outside in the hallway, I could hear voices, low, careful, 2 people talking just above a whisper. The servers, I thought, then the faint specific smell of a cigarette that had been smoked recently and not fully aired out, which told me it was Valeria, who had worked the floor at Maison Mercier for 19 years, and had a habit she apologized for approximately every 6 months. Then Marcus came in, and then the door opened again, and Theo came in with a man I did not know. The man was perhaps 45 years old, gray suit, well-made, no tie, reading glasses already on his face, a leather portfolio under his arm, the kind with an interior flap system for documents. He had the expression of a man who had been to many meetings exactly like this one and found them, if not enjoyable, then at least procedurally legible. He sat at the far end of the table, near the wall, and opened his portfolio and arranged his papers with the small, precise movements of a professional preparing his workspace. He did not introduce himself. He waited to be introduced. Theo sat beside him. He opened his laptop. He had at least the decency to look me in the face when he said, "Grandmère, thank you for coming." As if I had been invited, as if this were something other than what it was. "Theo," I said, "who is your friend?" "This is Geoffrey Arsenault," Theo said. He was wearing pale sage linen, slightly wrinkled from the day. "He's our attorney. He's been advising us on the restructuring." I looked at Geoffrey Arsenault. He met my gaze with professional courtesy, the kind that is extended to any party in a meeting regardless of function. The same brief acknowledgement you would offer an opposing counsel or a regulatory observer. I had been a party in many such meetings, and I understood exactly what his acknowledgement meant. I was an item on the agenda. I was the item the meeting was about. "I see," I said. "Mr. Arsenault." "Ms. Mercier," he said, neutral and correct. Marcus had not sat down. He was standing near the door, which I noticed the way you notice these things when you have been watching people for a long time. A man stands near the door when some part of him is not sure he wants to be in the room. "Let's get started," Theo said. What followed was approximately 40 minutes of performance. Theo had slides. Actual slides, projected from his laptop onto the small portable screen we kept in the private dining room for vendor presentations and catering proposals. There was a slide about revenue trends over the last 5 years, which showed a dip during the pandemic years, and a recovery curve that was, I noted, accurate. There was a slide about what he called market positioning, comparing Maison Mercier to peer restaurants in our segment, which was a reasonable analysis even if the peer set he had chosen was a little generous to our revenue numbers. There was a slide titled Organizational Clarity. It had a chart with boxes and lines, the kind of org chart that business schools teach you to draw. In one of the boxes, upper middle, not at the top, but close, in a pale gray font that required leaning forward slightly to read, my name, and beside it the designation, Founding silent partner. Legacy role. Legacy role. I wrote those 2 words on my legal pad. I underlined them once. I did not say anything. I did not change my expression. I continued to take notes in the margins as Theo walked through the slides, which were detailed and competently assembled, and represented, I could tell, many hours of preparation. He had worked hard on this. He had worked hard on removing me from the decision-making structure of the place I built, and I want you to hold that for a moment without letting it become simple, because it is not simple. The work he had put into this was a kind of evidence. Evidence that he was serious, that this had been planned, that it was not casual. It was also evidence that he cared about the restaurant. You do not put 50 hours into something you do not care about. He was wrong about nearly everything, but he was not indifferent. I have lived long enough to know that is almost harder to deal with than indifference, because you cannot simply dismiss it. The slides finished. Jeffrey Arsenault opened his leather portfolio and produced a document. 3 copies, each with a tabbed section divider system, the kind of production you commission when you want the other party to feel that the outcome is already settled. He slid 1 copy to me. He slid 1 copy to Marcus, who had finally sat down. He kept 1 for himself. "This is the amended operating agreement," Jeffrey said. His voice was pleasant, practiced. It reflects the updated management structure that has been discussed and agreed upon by the current active operators of Mercier Family Hospitality, LLC. I want to be clear, Ms. Mercier, that your equity stake is entirely unchanged. You retain your 14% ownership interest. 14%, I said. 14%, yes. Your financial interest is fully protected under this agreement. I opened my copy to the first tabbed section, read the paragraph, turned to the second tab, read that section. The room was very quiet while I read. The sconce on the wall made its faint electrical hum, the kind you can only hear when the room around it has gone completely still. Outside in the hallway, I heard Valeria laugh at something the other server said. A short laugh, quickly stopped, as if she had remembered herself. The smell of her cigarette had dissipated. The room smelled now of the last service. Garlic, something sweet, the faintest trace of the candles we use on the tables. "And if I sign this," I said, "what precisely changes?" Theo leaned forward slightly. He had his grandfather's posture when he did that. Renard used to lean exactly that way when he was about to say something he felt you needed to hear, with his forearms resting on the table and his chin just slightly lowered, a posture of serious-minded communication that he had probably learned from his own father without knowing it. To see that posture on a 29-year-old face was a strange experience. Not painful exactly, but I felt something move through me that had nothing to do with the meeting. I recognized it and set it aside. There would be time for it later. The day-to-day decision-making becomes streamlined, Theo said. Right now, certain operational decisions require your sign-off before they can move forward, and sometimes that creates delays that affect our ability to respond to the market. This amendment formalizes what's already true operationally. You'd remain a valued voice in the business, and you'd still be consulted on major strategic decisions. "But not required," I said. "Not required," he confirmed. "Not for operational decisions, no." "And who defines what counts as operational versus strategic?" Theo glanced at Jeffrey. Jeffrey said, "The agreement includes a scope provision in Section 4 that delineates the categories." "I've read Section 4, I said. "I'm asking who makes the call in a specific case." A brief pause. "The active management team," Jeffrey said, "which is Theo." "Theo and Marcus, yes." I set the document down on the table. I folded my hands on top of it. There is something I have known for a long time about what happens when a woman sits completely still in a room full of people who are expecting either compliance or confrontation. Both of those responses are, in a sense, gifts to the people waiting for them. Compliance means the thing proceeds. Confrontation means the thing becomes a conflict, and conflict has rules, and rules can be navigated. Stillness is different. Stillness requires the other party to continue generating momentum while receiving nothing to push against, and most people, in my experience, find that profoundly uncomfortable in a way they cannot name. I let the stillness sit for a moment. "I'm not going to sign this tonight," I said. Jeffrey Arsenault made a small adjustment to his pen. "Miss Mercier, I want to make certain you understand that this amendment doesn't affect your ownership position in any way." "Mr. Arsenault," I said, "I have understood every word in that document. I have been negotiating commercial contracts since you were in grade school, and I mean that as description rather than insult. I will take this home, I will have my own counsel review it, and then I will be in touch." He nodded once. Professional. He had done this before and would do it again. Then I turned to Marcus. He was looking at the table. He had been looking at the table for most of the last 40 minutes. "Marcus," I said. He looked up. I did not say anything further. We looked at each other for a moment, and whatever we communicated in that moment was ours alone and did not need to be explained to anyone in that room. I was gathering my things when Theo said, and I have thought about his exact wording many times since, have turned it in my mind the way you turn a stone to look at what grows under it. He said, "Grandmère, just so you understand, the vote has already been taken. The resolution passes regardless of your signature. The signature is just—" "Theo," I said. He stopped. "Finish your sentence," I said. "What is the signature just?" The room was very quiet. Danielle had set her pen down on the table. Geoffrey was looking at his papers without appearing to read them. Marcus was looking at the wall. Theo said quietly, not defiantly, not aggressively, with a kind of uncomfortable honesty that I think was probably the most genuine thing he produced that evening. A formality. I heard Celestine in that word. I heard the kitchen that smelled of duck fat and old newspaper. I heard the sound of a pen moving across paper before a woman had finished reading the whole thing. I picked up my bag. I said goodnight to each of them by name. Danielle, Marcus, Theo, Mr. Arsenault. I said it in exactly that tone, the tone of a woman who was not upset, who was not leaving in anger, who was simply leaving because the meeting was over, and she had somewhere else to be. Which was true. I had somewhere else to be. I had always had somewhere else to be. I walked through the dark kitchen and let myself out the back door. The deadbolt clicked behind me. New Orleans in April at 7:40 in the evening is warm and fragrant in a way that people describe poetically, and I have always experienced literally. The jasmine that climbs the fence of the property next door, the smell of fryer oil from the kitchen 2 blocks down, the particular low humidity of spring before the summer sets in, and the air becomes something you swim through rather than breathe. I stood on the back dock for a moment. The dock where Gerald Plouffe used to extend his hand 35 years ago, before I learned to make him afraid of me instead. I stood there. I breathed. Then I drove home. I did not cry on the drive home. I want to be precise about that, not because crying would have been wrong or weak or any of the things it gets called, but because I think the absence of tears confuses people, and I want you to understand what it actually meant. It meant I had moved past the feeling and into the thinking. And the thinking in this case had a particular quality. It was clean. It was certain. It was the thinking of a woman who has been waiting for a specific moment for a very long time and has just watched that moment arrive exactly as she knew it would. I drove home. I put the kettle on. I sat at my kitchen table, and I opened my bag and took out the document that I had not taken out at the meeting. 14 pages, blue cover sheet, notarial seal beginning to age at the corners. Now you can know what it says. In the spring of 1997, Renard and I renegotiated the foundation of Maison Mercier. The restaurant had grown in ways we had not fully imagined in 1981. We had absorbed the adjoining storefront, added the private dining room, expanded the kitchen to accommodate the catering operation that had grown up almost without our planning it. The building we occupied had changed ownership twice in 16 years. The new owners were a property holding company out of Métairie called Pelican Holdings, run by 2 brothers who wore matching expressions of polite impatience and had acquired the building as part of a larger commercial portfolio. They came to us with a lease proposal, 10-year term, good for them, manageable for us, renewable on their option. Not ours. Theirs. Renard did not like the structure. He said so directly in that first meeting, which was the right instinct. What he was less certain about was the alternative structure, because Renard was a chef and not a lease attorney, and that is not a criticism. It is simply true. I spent 6 weeks on those negotiations. I came to them with a commercial real estate attorney named Paulette Dufresne, who was 72 years old that year, had been practicing in New Orleans for 4 decades, and had a habit of wearing large amber rings on both hands that caught the light when she gestured, which she used to considerable effect in negotiating rooms. Paulette and I together got what we actually wanted, which was this: a master lease, 25-year initial term with 3 options to renew for 5 years each. The renewal options belonged to the tenant, not the landlord, ours. And because Paulette knew the specific provisions of Louisiana property law as they applied to long-term commercial leases on historically designated commercial properties in Orleans Parish, and because the building on Claiborne and Desire had carried a historic commercial designation since 1989, the master lease was executed, not in the name of Mercier Family Hospitality, LLC, which had not yet been formally organized as an LLC in 1997. It was executed in my name, individual, Opal Celestine Mercier, not the company, me. This was not an oversight. This was not a bureaucratic accident of the kind that creates legal complications no one intended. This was exactly what Paulette and I designed, for reasons that were partly practical and partly protective, and that I thought through very carefully, and have no obligation to justify to you or anyone else 28 years later. What I will say is that Renard knew. Renard sat across from me at our kitchen table on Frenchman Street the evening after the final documents were executed, and I walked him through what Paulette and I had done, and Renard said, in his particular way of arriving at a conclusion after traveling through it slowly, "Opal, that feels exactly right." Then he made us both a cup of chicory coffee and we went to bed, and that was the conversation. The lease had renewed twice since then, once in 2022 under the first 5-year option, and the second renewal option was approaching. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me be precise about the timing because the timing matters. The first renewal option came due in the spring of 2022. 4 weeks before it came due, Theo organized the meeting in the private dining room. He did not know the renewal was coming due. He did not know because nobody had told him, because the lease was not in the company's records. It was in mine, in my fireproof safe, in my name. And because, in the nearly 25 years since that lease was signed, not one person in the operating structure of Maison Mercier had thought to go to the city's commercial property records and look up who held the underlying lease on the building. Why would they? The restaurant had been there for 40 years. The building was the building. It was infrastructure. You do not think about the foundation unless someone asks you whether the foundation is going to hold. Nobody had asked. This is what I mean when I say, I knew what card I was holding. I had known since 2003 when the first lease renewal window opened, and I exercised it, that the floor of Maison Mercier was mine. I had known when Marcus took over the kitchen. I had known when Theo started attending meetings. I had known every time someone moved me slightly further to the left in the frame. And now, on the evening of the meeting, driving home through the dark streets of New Orleans with the document in my bag and the deadbolt's click still in my ear, I held it still. I had not played it. The question was not whether I had it. The question was what kind of woman I was going to be in the playing of it. That question took 2 weeks. I walked. I am a walker, have always been a walker, and New Orleans is a city that gives back to walkers who are willing to be uncomfortable, willing to be hot, willing to be slow, willing to let the city set the pace, rather than imposing your own. I walked in the mornings before it got too warm, through the Marigny, and down through the Bywater, and sometimes along the riverfront where the air smells of diesel and catfish, and something mineral and old that I have been trying to name for 43 years. I walked through the tram on evenings when the brass bands were setting up, the sound coming to me in fragments, and then in full as I turned a corner, the kind of sound that New Orleans uses to process grief and celebration, simultaneously, because it has always understood that they are the same impulse. I walked past Maison Mercier twice in those 2 weeks, did not go in, stood on the sidewalk across the street on a Thursday evening, and watched through the window as the dining room did what the dining room has done for 4 decades, filled, tables coming alive, candles lit, the low collective sound of a full room, which from the outside is a vibration as much as a sound, something you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. I watched a server I did not recognize move between the tables, young, probably new, learning the floor plan in the way all new servers learn it, by feel and by repetition. She stopped at a table near the window and said something, and the people at the table laughed. That is what Maison Mercier is. That has always been what it is. A place where people laugh at something a young woman says while they wait for their food. I pressed my hand flat against the window glass. It was cold from the air conditioning working hard on the other side, cold in the specific way that plate glass is cold, thin enough that you can feel the warmth in the room behind the cold, both things at once. I walked home. What I kept returning to in those 2 weeks of walking was not the slide with the pale gray font. It was not the word formality. It was Theo's face at the moment before I stopped him, the set of his jaw, the thing I had seen in him that I had not expected, not malice, not cynicism, not the calculation of a young man trying to take what is not his. What I had seen was belief. He believed he was doing the right thing. He had constructed, in his well-organized 29-year-old mind, a version of events in which removing me from active decision-making was an act of care, in which the most loving thing to do with an old woman was to take the weight of responsibility off her shoulders before she had to ask for it, in which love was a logistics problem, and he was solving it. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about nearly everything. But he was wrong the way people are wrong when they have replaced relationship with system and convinced themselves that the system is the more loving option because it is clean and clear and does not require ongoing renegotiation. That kind of wrong does not have a villain. That kind of wrong has people who love each other making mistakes that accumulate until they become structural, and then someone has to decide whether to dismantle the structure or live inside it. I had lived inside it for 3 years. I had watched and waited and said nothing and held the document in my safe while the decisions I was supposed to be party to were made around me. I had done that deliberately, because I was watching and because I am patient, and because some information reveals its full meaning only when you let it run, as long as it is going to run. But there is a place past patience where something else begins, and I had reached it in the back parking lot when I heard the deadbolt click. So I went home, and I thought for 2 weeks, and then I called Marguerite Fonville. Marguerite had come recommended by 3 different people whose judgment I trusted, which is my threshold. She was in her early 40s, kept her office on Magazine Street, in a converted Victorian shotgun house that smelled of old wood and printer toner, and had a habit that I recognized immediately as a technique. She listened for a very long time without writing anything down, and then she wrote everything down at once, efficiently, as if she had been organizing the information in her head the entire time she was sitting still. The notepad in front of her went from blank to full in about 30 seconds. I found this deeply reassuring. I told her the situation. I walked her through the meeting. I walked her through the document in my bag, which I had brought, and I slid it across her desk, and she read all 14 pages in my presence. The coffee pot on the small table in the corner of her office cycled through its warmth, from brewing to hot to warm to the particular silence of a pot that has gone cold while the 2 of you have been busy with something else. She looked up over her reading glasses when she finished. "Ms. Mercier," she said. "Yes," I said. "You've had this for 25 years. "I have." She looked at me for a moment in the way I imagine very good poker players look at each other when one of them realizes the other one has been playing a different game entirely, not admiring exactly, recalibrating. "What do you want to do?" she said. Not what can you do? What do you want to do? And I noted the distinction immediately, because it was the correct question, and most people do not ask the correct question. I told her. She wrote it down. Then she looked at her notes, and she looked at the document, and she said, "All right, let me draft the letter." The letter went to Jeffrey Arsenault first, because he was the attorney of record for the other side, and that is how it is done, and it was copied to Marcus, to Theo, and to Danielle. I had insisted on Danielle being included. Danielle had organized the meeting. That made her a principal, whether she wanted the title or not. The letter stated, in language that was entirely correct and entirely without drama, that as the sole holder of the master lease on the commercial property at the address of Maison Mercier, I was exercising my right of formal notice under the terms of the lease, and that the renewal option, which was set to expire in 16 days from the date of the letter, would be contingent on a meeting between my counsel and the current operators of Mercier Family Hospitality, LLC, to discuss the conditions under which said renewal would proceed. That was the body of the letter. That was all of it. Marguerite had proposed a second paragraph that laid out, in plain language, the specific consequences of non-renewal. I told her to leave it out. "They'll figure it out," I said. "You don't want to make it explicit." "They are not unintelligent people," I said, "and I would like them to have the experience of figuring it out for themselves. I think it will be instructive." Marguerite considered this for a moment. Then she wrote something on her notepad and said, "All right." The letter went by email and overnight courier on a Wednesday afternoon. Thursday morning before 8 o'clock, I had a voicemail from Jeffrey Arsenault. His voice was careful, measured, with the specific quality of a man who has spent the previous evening on the phone with other people and has arrived at a position. He said there appeared to have been a gap in the diligence on the property records. He said he was certain we could reach an equitable resolution. He said he would appreciate the opportunity to meet at my earliest convenience. A gap in the diligence. I listened to the voicemail in my garden, where I had been thinning the basil. I set my phone down on the edge of the raised bed and stood there with my hands still dirty for a minute. The basil smelled sharp and green. The morning was already warm. I called Marguerite. She called Jeffrey. The meeting was set for the following Monday at my house. I insisted on my house. Not a conference room, not the restaurant, not some neutral location with a round table and bottled water. My house on Frenchman Street, with the mismatched armchairs in the parlor and the ceiling fan that needed a new pull chain but worked. My kitchen, my table, my light coming in sideways. Marguerite arrived 20 minutes early, and we had coffee, and she told me that Jeffrey had spent a considerable amount of time, apparently, in the Orleans Parish commercial property records over the weekend. I said I expected he had. She said he had also, apparently, had a conversation with Marcus and Theo separately, before agreeing to the meeting. I said I expected that too. She said she wanted to know if I had any flexibility on any of the terms I had outlined. On 2 of the terms, I said. Not on the fundamental structure. Which 2? He'll tell us when he gets here, I said. She looked at me with the recalibrating expression again. You already know what he's going to propose. I know what I would propose if I were him, I said, which is the same thing. We heard the car outside at almost exactly 10 o'clock. Marcus came in first, which surprised me. I had expected Theo to lead. Marcus was wearing his kitchen clothes, dark pants, and a white chef's coat with his name embroidered on the chest, which meant he had come from the restaurant, which meant he had opened the kitchen this morning and come to this meeting directly from working. And something about that detail made me feel a thing I will not name but which mattered. Then Theo came in, and then Jeffrey, who was wearing the same gray suit. I showed them into the parlor. Marguerite had arranged the chairs. Jeffrey sat in the armchair by the window. Marcus sat on the settee. Theo took the chair by the bookshelf, the one with the uneven front left leg that I have propped with a folded piece of cardboard for about 10 years, waiting for the time I get around to proper repair, which I have not gotten around to. He felt the wobble immediately when he sat down, shifted his weight, registered it the way you register an unexpected physical detail in a familiar kind of situation. For a moment, just a moment, he looked the way children look when they sit in the wrong chair, young, uncertain in his body. He was wearing pale green linen today. He had a yellow legal pad on his knee, and I noticed he had borrowed my habit, which I took quietly and to myself as a kind of sign. He looked at me and said, "Grand-mère," his name for me. Not Miss Mercier, not even Opal, the name he had called me since he was 3 years old and could not yet manage the word grandmother. I looked at him. I didn't know, he said. His voice was level and without excuse. I know you didn't, I said. He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded once and looked at his legal pad. The pen in his hand was still. Marcus, on the settee beside him, had his elbow on his knee and was looking at the floor in the way he has looked at the floor since he was 7 years old and had done something he was not proud of. A very specific posture, chin slightly down, weight forward, a Mercier man trying to figure out how to stay in a difficult truth without leaving it. I have known that posture for 50 years. I had a great deal of feeling about it, and I set all of it aside, because there was business to do, and the feelings were not going anywhere. "All right," I said. "Let me tell you what I'm proposing." Jeffrey had a pen ready. Marguerite had hers. I had prepared this the same way I had prepared every negotiation that mattered, by deciding first what I was not willing to move on, and then by deciding where I had genuine flexibility, and then by being honest about both. Not strategic honest, where you perform transparency to create trust, actually honest, because what I wanted underneath everything was not to punish anyone. What I wanted was to not be invisible. Those are very different things, and it is important not to confuse them. "My equity stake remains at 14%, I said. "That's not a negotiating position. That's the starting point." Jeffrey nodded. He had expected that. "The operating agreement is revised. My title is changed, executive chairperson. The title carries 3 specific rights. I had written them down, but I did not look at the paper. I'd been thinking about this for 2 weeks. The right to be consulted, required, not courtesy. On any decision that materially affects the structure of the business. The right to attend any meeting called in the name of Mercier Family Hospitality, LLC, without requiring an invitation. And the right of veto on any decision that would fundamentally change what Maison Mercier is, its name, its location, or the essential character of what it serves." "That last one is broad," Jeffrey said. "It's intentionally broad," I said. "It means that if Theo wants to turn the dining room into a fast casual concept, I can say no. It does not mean I can veto his hiring decisions or his menu choices. The difference between those 2 things is discernible. If it becomes a question, we have counsel." Theo said. "And the lease?" "The lease renews," I said. 5-year option, my name, same as it has always been. After 5 years, we renegotiate the structure together, with everyone at the table." I paused. A real table, not slides. Theo looked at his legal pad. A small muscle moved in his jaw, his grandfather's jaw. "What about operational decisions?" he said. "The day-to-day. You're not going to require sign-off on—" "Theo," I said. He stopped. "I am not trying to run the restaurant. I never was. I am trying to be in the building. Do you understand the difference?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." Marcus looked up from the floor. He said, in the voice he uses when he is saying something that costs him something, "Mama, what we did, the way we handled this. I'm sorry." I looked at my son who had his father's hands and his grandfather's jaw, and a way of making a crab bisque that his father could not have improved on, and who had let things proceed in a direction that both of us were going to have to live with for a while. "I know," I said. "We should have talked to you. Yes, you should have." I let that sit for 1 breath, then 2. Then I said, "We can talk now." Jeffrey cleared his throat. "I'll need 48 hours to draft the revised agreement." "Take what you need," I said. "Do it right." Then I looked at Theo one more time. He was looking at me, not at the legal pad, not at the floor, at me. "Your grandfather built this kitchen," I said. "Not the one on Claiborne, the one in here." I meant it literally. Renard had remodeled the kitchen in this house the year Marcus was born, built the cabinets himself, hung the shelves himself, installed the deep farmhouse sink that I still use every day. He built it the same way your great-grandfather built that table, a little bigger than the room called for, because he thought we'd grow into it. Don't make me sorry I believed the same thing about you. Theo didn't say anything. He pressed his lips together, and something moved through his face, something private that I will not describe in detail because it belongs to him. He nodded, slow. Jeffrey called 47 hours later. The revised agreement was acceptable on all material points. One minor modification to the scope language in the veto provision, which Marguerite reviewed and which was a reasonable clarification that I had actually expected. I told Marguerite to accept it. The paperwork was completed within the week. I signed it at Marguerite's office in her chair, in the blue-black ink I use for everything that matters. The ink Renard used to tease me about because he said nobody still used blue-black, and I said that was because most people did not pay close attention to what they were signing. The lease renewal executed on the morning of the 30th day. Marguerite sent a confirmation by email and called to say it had processed. I thanked her, which I rarely do by phone because I tend to be brief on the phone, but she had earned it. I made a cup of coffee. I stood at my kitchen window and watched the June light come through sideways. That was 8 months ago. Maison Mercier is still open. It was never going to close. I want to be clear about that because I think some of you are wondering, and the answer is no. I was never going to let it close. Not over this, not over anything short of an actual catastrophe. The Thursday nights are still full in the way they have been full for decades. That weight in the room, that specific density of conversation and glass clink, and the low sound of a kitchen doing exactly what it knows how to do. Marcus put a new dish on the menu in September. A crab bisque with a technique that I had not seen him attempt before, a kind of patience in the reduction that produces a depth of flavor his father spent 20 years trying to describe in words before giving up and just demonstrating it. When I tasted it in October, I told Marcus it was the best thing he had made in 5 years. He looked surprised. He should not have looked surprised. I've always told him the truth about his food. What surprises him, I think, is that I am still at the table when the tasting happens. He should not be surprised by that either. That is what I am trying to tell him. Theo and I have had 3 working meetings since the summer. They are not warm yet in the way that the meetings we had before were warm. The ease of them, the assumption of goodwill, the shorthand. That ease is not there. What is there instead is something more deliberate, more considered. We look at each other now with the specific attention of people who know that the other person is more than they had assumed, and that knowledge changes the quality of looking. Whether it becomes warmth again, I don't know. Some relationships go through something and come out as a different shape on the other side. Not worse, necessarily, just different. We are finding out which. Danielle sent me a pot of lily bulbs from her garden in May, purple and white, packaged in a brown paper bag with her handwriting on the label. For your yard. No explanation, no formal apology, just the bulbs, which was, if you know Danielle, a very considered choice. I planted them along the fence near the crepe myrtle that had been growing too close to the brickwork. They have not bloomed yet. They will. I have thought a great deal in these 8 months about what Celestine signed in that kitchen that smelled of duck fat and old newspaper. I have thought about what she thought she was signing, whether she knew, whether she suspected, whether there was a version of her story in which she knew exactly what she was giving away and gave it anyway, because the cost of the alternative, the argument, the disruption, the long winter of a family that has chosen sides, seemed too high. I think about that possibility more than I thought I would. I think it is more likely than not. I think Celestine made a calculation, and the calculation was wrong. Not because she was wrong about the cost of fighting, but because she underestimated the cost of not fighting. The cost is the same, it turns out. The family winters either way. The difference is only which version of yourself you carry through the winter. I want to be honest with you about something, though, because this channel is built on honesty, and you have given me something by watching, and I owe you the complicated version. Holding the card that I held did not make me immune to doubt. There were mornings, in those 2 weeks of walking, when I thought, maybe let it go. Maybe Theo is right that a cleaner structure is better for the business. Maybe the thing I am protecting is not Maison Mercier, but my own need to matter, and those are not the same thing, and maybe the more principled choice is the one that puts my ego last. I had those mornings. I had several of them. They were not brief, and what I kept coming back to, every time, was not the insult of the pale gray font, or the word legacy, or the word formality. It was a simpler thing. It was the picture of the next woman in my family, Marcus's daughter Simone, who is 11, who comes to the restaurant on Saturday mornings sometimes and sits on the high stool by the prep counter and eats biscuits while her grandfather works, who watches everything with enormous attention and says almost nothing, who is already, at 11, taking the shape of a watcher. The picture of Simone, at 68, being handed a piece of paper in a room full of people who love her. I thought, what does she see us do? That was the question. Not what is the right outcome for this particular dispute. What does Simone see us do when the question is whether a woman's knowledge in labor and investment entitle her to the same authority they would entitle a man? What does she learn from watching us about what is acceptable and what is not, and about whether the women in her family have ever refused? I refused. I did it without raising my voice, without cruelty, without dismantling what 4 decades of love had built. I did it by being right, and by being patient, and by understanding that the floor of a building belongs to whoever laid it correctly. And that correct laying is its own kind of power, quiet and total, the kind that waits as long as it needs to because it has nowhere it is going to fall to. A resolution can restructure a business. It can rewrite titles and reorder chains of command. It can declare, in typed letters on official paper, that the vote has been taken and the outcome is decided. What it cannot do, what no document drafted by any attorney in any office can accomplish, is remove the ground from under the people who are standing on it. The ground is not in the operating agreement. The ground is not in the org chart. The ground is where it has always been, in the hands of the person who made sure it was solid before anyone thought to ask. They forgot to look at the ground. And now I am back at this kitchen table, this morning, this light, holding the document, the familiar weight of 14 pages, the renewal box on the last page, waiting. I am going to sign it today. I have already decided, but I have been sitting here for 20 minutes first, not because I am uncertain, but because some mornings the right thing to do is to stay in the feeling of knowing before you move into the doing, to hold what you have built, the whole shape of it, the long arc from that duck-fat kitchen in 1984 to this table in 2022, and to let yourself feel the weight of that arc without rushing to the next thing. Renard would have understood this. He was a man who thought the best food came from knowing when not to add another ingredient. You reach the moment when it is right, and you stop there, and you let it be right before you move. There is one chair in the private dining room at Maison Mercier that sat empty at the April meeting. Left side of the white oak table, 3 from the end. I will be in it at the meeting 9 days from now. The one I called, the one I will chair, with everyone present, including a chef named Céline who trained in Lyon and grew up in Brobridge and wants apparently to learn what Creole means from the ground up, starting with the people who built it. I am interested in her, and there is a call I have not returned yet. It came last week, a New Orleans number I did not recognize, and when I called it back I reached the voicemail of a woman named Delphine Arsenault, who said she was Jeffrey's mother, who said she had heard something about what happened from her son, who said she had a story of her own and thought I might want to hear it. I wrote her number on the notepad by the coffee pot. I have not called her back yet. I am going to pour my coffee first.